Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the seminar series for our group. Today we have Wai-Ming Z from the School of Computer Science, University of Sydney. Wai-Ming is a good friend of mine, and thanks, Wai-Ming, for this talk. And today he will be talking about robot learning in unstructured environments. And his research area is in the intersection of robotics and machine learning. And he will be beginning a postdoc in CMU from next year. So all the best.
Thanks. So I've attended Rohit's seminar and reading group series for a while, and thought it was time to give back and actually talk about some of the stuff that I've been doing. So as the title suggests, I will be talking about robot learning in environments. So my research area is in the intersection of robotics and machine learning. Now, you may have seen in the news various types of robots or news about various robots, and you might get the feeling that in the not too far future, you can have robots doing a variety of things out in the wild, interacting with humans. But sadly, that notion that kind of autonomous systems that are kind of able to generalize in the real world, that's still actually something that's quite far away. So existing robot systems are often brittle, right? And the main issue is that if you throw a robot in a very precise and structured environment, you'll be fine. You can do that with basically pre-specified controls. But when you throw a robot into the real world, there's just basically too many or endless permutations of scenarios to handle. And so we seek to use machine learning to endow robots with the capability to learn from past experiences rather than to hand code a bunch of rules. So I usually give talks on specific problems and methods, but this time I've decided to just give an overview of some of the stuff that I've done, and I'm going to talk about two specific contributions in each of these areas. So the first area is using learning for environment representation. So a robot moving around needs to, if a robot is navigating, it needs to have good models of the surroundings that it's in. In particular, I'm going to be talking about my work on continuous occupancy representations and their fusion in multi-agent scenarios. Additionally, I'm going to talk about spatial temporal models of motion direction. So how does a robot try to capture some representation in a dynamic environment? Then I'll be talking about this broader area of learning for anticipatory navigation. And that is to say, a robot, when a robot navigates through kind of a dynamic environment, let's say with a crowd or something of the sort, existing reactive methods will result in the robot getting stuck just because of being reactionary, basically. So we develop methods to kind of predict how movements of other agents in the environment move, and then kind of take that into consideration and formulate control problems against that. And the last kind of area that I'm going to be talking about is motion generation for robot manipulators. This is probably oftentimes what you envision a robot to be, right? A robot arm, fairly high degrees of freedom. What if we want to teach robots to do a specific thing, like to lift a box? and to reach some point, for example. And in particular, I'm going to be talking about a method I developed for generalized imitation learning. So this is kind of the scenario where you show the robot how to do something, and then the robot tries to imitate it and then generalize. The other problem is kind of global and reactive motion generation. So this is similar to path planning. So planning a path and also getting controls. We'll talk about that in detail when we get there. So due to the variety of topics, I'm going to be mainly showing the results and kind of giving an overview of the method. I'm happy for you guys to kind of stop me at any point and throw me in the specifics of the method. Cool. So learning for environment representation. So the first thing that I'm going to be talking about are continuous representations of the environment. So one of the most important maps a robot needs to build are these occupancy maps. The robot navigating around needs to have some sort of model that tells the robot, at this point in space, what is the probability of it being occupied, right? And so how do we build these maps? So you would have sensor readings like this, right? That comes from things like LiDARs that can tell you the depth of kind of when the beam hits and so forth. So traditionally, what people have done is to build these grid maps, basically. So they discretize the entire environment into cells, and then you can compute something like log odds of each cell, and then kind of just use that sort of representation. So with the introduction of machine learning, so this sort of stuff comes out of kind of my supervisor's work, which was on, why don't we actually represent these or to model these maps as continuous functions, simply mapping from the coordinates to the probability of them being occupied, rather than discretizing the entire space, right? Because the real world is not discrete, right? And so here is an example of kind of a continuous map that's being built, right? So you get sensor readings, and then you have this sort of model, and then you can query and then say at a given point, what is the probability of it being occupied? Now, the way this works is, so this kind of more classical way of doing this is basically to learn a classifier, right? So we have spatial points. We can create these features in space by projecting a data point of interest to spatially fixed coordinates, and then get a feature vector from that and basically train up a classifier to tell you at what point, at a specific point, what the probability is. So my contributions to this is to develop a fast Bayesian version of this. Well, you can, if you can do logistic regression, you can also do Bayesian logistic regression and have weights over, distributions over the weights, right? And basically, I make the mean field assumption, and I can end up getting this these equations for variational inference for this. Now, the benefit of having these distributions over these weights is we can then design algorithms to kind of fuse these weights together in a multi-agent scenario. So the problem setup goes kind of like this. In a multi-agent scenario, each agent goes around, it builds its representation individually, and then periodically it would try to fuse the map with the other agents. As the features for each map is the same, so these come from spatially fixed points. The map merging for these models now becomes a fusion of the distributions over the weights. Basically in this work, we've devised a algorithm that does this fusion and also keeps track of the representation at the previous merger so that we don't double count and we keep track of kind of the mutual information between these mergers. So kind of here's an example of kind of 4 simulated robots trying to create their own individual maps, and then we can kind of fuse it. And we evaluate this compared to what would happen if a robot went around and trained its individual map. So why is this beneficial? So memory efficiency of these continuous representations. So a major benefit is that if you have a discretized representation where you have cells, to get a good map, you actually have to have quite small cells. And you need to kind of estimate a value for each of these cells. If you just retain the parameters of the classifier, you actually have a much more concise model than the entire map. And the benefit of this is in a multi-agent scenario, you're actually able to use much less bandwidth when you do this fusion compared to if you send the whole discretized map. Basically, the numerical results basically just claim that the degradation in terms of the merge compared to building an entire map with one robot is not that great. Cool. So moving on to the other topic, or the other kind of subject in this topic, is now we want to expand these continuous maps to represent dynamic environments. So previously we talked about static occupancy maps. Now let's try, so the problem setup goes as such, right? So if oftentimes the robot might find itself in a dynamic environment. So for example, this is quite a famous data set collected at Edinburgh University, where they have some sort of courtyard, and they track kind of people going around. Now, a robot might want to ask the question of, at this time of the day, at this location, where would I expect folks to generally go, right? And here we try and learn a mapping from space and time to the distribution of motion directions. So how is this done? Details in the paper, but basically we have this basically a mixture density network type model, which tries to estimate the conditional distribution conditioned on space-time coordinates over the directions. Now, the distribution here, so usually when you see a setup like this, you have like a mixture of Gaussians or whatnot. That does not wrap, well, the support of that is not at negative pi to pi, where you expect kind of directions to be, right? So there's this really nice distribution called the von Mises distribution that actually kind of wraps around. And these are kind of the types of predictions that you would get that actually live kind of in the valid support. So in this case, we see that this continuous representation is data efficient. Now, in the previous sort of setup where you were trying to build an occupancy map, right? Sensors on a robot actually just flood kind of flood in data, right? LiDARs can be a fairly high frequency, and you oftentimes need to drop data points. So you're kind of flooded with data, but in settings where you have kind of people moving around, you might not have as much data. Now, basically, what we end up realizing was that in these sort of setups, the continuous representation is actually more efficient than kind of building a grid map. And we actually perform better when we are at low resolutions. So now with that kind of FOIA data set, we're able to get results such as this, right? So these 3 points at different times. We can basically predict how folks generally move. Okay, so that's topic 1 gone. That was in my opinion, the kind of the topic that was less dynamic, because now we're going to see actual videos of things moving, and might be more exciting. So now we're going to be talking about anticipatory navigation. That is, you have a ground robot moving through crowds of people and other dynamic obstacles. The framework that presented is this stochastic process anticipatory navigation. Basically, there's this observation, if you will, that even in the 80s that they made was that for ground robots that are non-holonomic, that means they can't just move around. They, to go sideways, you need to go ahead. Basically, for wheeled robots of this kind, it's very easy for them to actually freeze in the crowd, and they basically get stuck. And that is not ideal. So how do we try? So humans have this nice ability of kind of anticipating how someone coming towards you might move, and you move in accordance to that, right? So when pedestrians are moving, there's some sort of dance that is going on. So we need a model that actually predicts, how you would expect agents in the environment move. And then we want to, so this is the framework, we basically formulate a control problem that takes into account of these probabilistic predictions, how humans move, and this is solved in a receding horizon fashion. That means, well, it's constantly solved at some frequency to get controls, and then your robot will take those control actions, and then it will do the whole thing again and formulate this control problem, solve it, and then take actions. Cool. So trajectory representation. So this is how we represent trajectories. So we propose to represent trajectories as continuous, as conditional distributions over continuous trajectories. That is, instead of modeling trajectories as discrete points, so this is kind of as an output, we model trajectories as continuous functions mapping from time to coordinates. And we basically did the same trick as we did with the continuous maps, right? So you have a bunch of basis functions, let's say, and you have weights on those basis functions. And you basically can kind of concisely represent a trajectory via its weights. And this problem becomes one where you want to condition on the previous motion of the pedestrian that you've seen, and then use that to predict distributions over the weights of this continuous trajectory representation. And And if you assume that the distribution of the weights are Gaussian, you basically get a Gaussian process, and you can do various things with it, but one of them is you can sample trajectories from this. Cool. Okay, now using these predictions, we basically formulate what is known as a time to collision controller. Basically, okay, so to go into details about this, we'll need to look at the paper, but to give you guys some intuition, you can basically formulate a control. So control problems are optimization problems where you have some sort of control cost and you have various constraints that come from, let's say, the kinematics of the robot. And in this case, there have been previous work that utilizes time to collision a variable, which is to say, if you look into the future, when do you think you'll collide? And you can use this information and optimize against that. We don't optimize it as a constraint, but rather put it in the control costs. And you would constantly solve this and get your controls. Okay, so let's look at some videos. So I have some videos on simulated crowds, which are really aggressive, that don't look like crowds, or look like super aggressive crowds, actually, and also on real-world pedestrian data. Let me try and find. Okay, so let's see it going. Crowds, so this is our non-holonomic robot. So what you see that is very interesting is it'll actually try to predict how people in the environment walk and actually follow, humans that or pedestrians that are predicted to go in the same direction. Yeah, this is quite an aggressive crowd, but our robot is able to smoothly navigate through. And it follows people going in the same direction. Okay, but that's even more of the same thing. But what is more interesting is maybe you would want to see what the predictions look like. And the predictions look something like this, shown in purple. There's a robot there, crowds predicting how they move, and it finds its way to the goal. Cool. Any questions, comments, thoughts, opinions? Okay. Let's get that. Oops.
There's a more aggressive crowd that's probably.
Yeah, so these crowd simulators, there are various parameters that you can set. But if you have a crowd that is too passive, it'll actually make way for the robot, and so it doesn't, I guess, challenge the robot enough. Cool. So emergent behavior. So this was something that I found really cool, and that is kind of following the ambulance, if you will. Right? This is not specifically pre-programmed or anything of the sort, but you see that this behavior arises, and it's in the real-world data, it actually tried to avoid this crowd chokehold that it predicted these pedestrians to kind of converge to. And yeah, so we would. So this is kind of. I haven't shown you a video of that, but the reactive method oftentimes gets stuck. So if you don't incorporate these predictions, you will have instances where you're frozen because you're going head on with the guy going towards it. Cool. Okay, so that's with the stochastic process, anticipatory navigation. Now, the second piece of work in this topic is kind of improving motion prediction with structural constraints. And that is to say that in previous work that utilize or to kind of develop these predictive methods of how things will move, it's unable to actually factor in the environment. So oftentimes you would have a map of the environment, right? You might have an occupancy map. And you would know that other agents are not likely to actually go through something that is considered occupied. So how do we actually factor that in to the predictive model, right? So the simplest answer is, I don't know, you have some sort of abstraction, you have a convolutional neural net, you get features out of the map, and then you just condition on the features. But here we're actually going to formulate this combined learning and optimization problem, where we can then use trajectory optimization to fix up predictions that are kind of wrong. So here's an example, right? So let's say you have data points of, or you're conditioning on kind of historical paths of where this specific pedestrian is heading, and you might predict a distribution of trajectories that look like this blue bunch of trajectories, right? It's subtly in collision with the environment. And so you want to fix that up. The other thing that you'll realize is that it actually provides a very good initial solution for an optimization problem, right? It's kind of quite close to being safe, but not exactly, right? And once we fix it up, it can look something like the green trajectory here, whereby it satisfies a chance constraint on the predicted distribution of trajectories being in collision. So I don't think we have time to go over the framework, but basically it's combining learning and a optimization problem over the distribution of trajectories. We basically try to minimize the KL divergence in the over the weight distributions, and we set a chance constraint based on some cost operator on the distribution of trajectories. So I'll show you some results. So here are kind of purely predictive results, and you'll see that some of them really don't try to factor in any of the environment features. Now, if we want to fix them, so the green here have been fixed and the red ones have not been fixed. Something interesting here is that, so these arrows here are actually the gradients with respect to occupancy. So I mentioned before that, going back to the environment representation, we can get these continuous representations, right? Now the benefit of them is you can actually get gradients with respect to the occupancy. So you can actually kind of push these distributions of trajectories in or nudge them into places that have lower occupancy, right? So lower chance of being in collision. And so your model will end up predicting, so these are, what are they called? Abscess points. So if you try to kind of numerically integrate some of them, these would be partnership points, abscesses. Anyway, points. So these points show what the trajectory distribution would look like. And you see that it is in a lot less collision. Okay, so the final topic is this learning for motion generation. So the first problem that we're going to be looking at is this generalized imitation learning. And this is in this setup, you would try to teach the robot to do something, for example, to lift a box. And the reason why you would do this is sometimes it's just difficult to tell a robot what to do if you want to specify some sort of cost, right? So how do you specify the cost of, I don't know, lifting a box or something, right? So oftentimes it's easier to just show the robot how to lift a box. Now, the issue with this is that the number of demonstrations that you can give a robot is actually very limited if you think about it. If you compare it against the kind of deep learning models that we're using, right? So oftentimes you would then require additional behavior to be satisfied, such as collision avoidance if the environment changes. Or what if you have some additional biases, right? So now, you know, we want the robot to actually move in this direction for a bit and then lift up the box. So here's a motivating problem, and that is if you show the robot how to lift a box, and suddenly you have a water bottle there. So how do you try and get this robot to generalize and also kind of do this box lifting motion? Okay, so the framework that we propose is this Diffiomorphic Templates framework. So this paper, so to get to the bottom of this, essentially, we have an additional requirement for the motion that we want to generate. So we represent this motion as essentially trajectories or integrals of a vector field, right? You know, for those of you who have worked with, you know, dynamical systems before, you know that you can visualize a dynamical system as a vector field, and you can integrate trajectories on that dynamical system, right? Now, there are various definitions for stability, but one of them is kind of arguing about asymptotic stability, and that is, you know, if you start at some point and integrate for a long time, what do you expect the trajectory to do? Does it converge to a point? Does it converge to multiple points? Does it fly off? Right. So this kind of long-term behavior. Now, in this problem, we actually want the trajectories to be asymptotically stable. So how do we learn systems that are asymptotically stable or construct systems that are asymptotically stable? And the way to do this is by using diffeomorphic templates. So a nice observation is that if you have a system that is already stable and you essentially morph it by an invertible function, so you pass it through an invertible function, and what happens is basically you sort of morph this vector field. The resultant vector field is also will also have the same stability properties, and so that's kind of the way that we're building these templates. It's basically we are modularizing each requirement as an invertible function, and then basically composing these to get kind of diverse behavior. So how do we actually construct these invertible functions? Well, the key to this is what is known as an infinitesimal generator. It's basically another vector field where if you start integrating on that vector field, as long as this is Lipschitz, you can reverse it. So you start at some point, you flow down to some point, and you basically reverse the vector field, integrate for the same amount of time, you're back to where you are. And so you can kind of use this to kind of construct these invertible functions. So here's an example where we have where we want to learn this S motion, and we start off with a very simple kind of attractor, right? So this has kind of one global equilibrium point, And then we learn this, this infinitesimal generator. And basically, we can, basically using this to morph this intuitively. And you can get a vector field that looks like this. And the stability properties are maintained. Now, notably, we can choose to learn these infinitesimal generators. We can also craft them. So this is a nice way to kind of combine learning along with kind of any specified or handcrafted modules. Very interestingly, we can construct diffeomorphic templates from continuous occupancy maps. And that is actually, you can do that actually by considering the occupancy gradients. More details in the paper, but kind of here's an example of obstacle avoidance behavior. You can also construct or hand specify these vector fields, these infinitesimal generators, right? And so here is an example where we want this. So this original vector field, if you integrate on that, you'll get demonstrations of writing the character J. Now, if you kind of morph it towards this point, you can get this kind of behavior where you're biasing it at some point to another point that we specify, right? Like this. So let's show some results. So this is no surprise that we can imitate writing of characters, but the kind of more interesting part, we believe, is this generalization of imitation. So we have simulated results and also real-world robot results. So in the simulated results, we basically show the robot how to lift a box, push a box, draw S, and then we add obstacles. In the real-world experiments here, the robot is taught how to draw an S. So we have videos of this, and then you have another obstacle. So this is, we teach the robot how to push a box off the table, and then we have a new obstacle, and it's able to avoid that, push the box. This set of experiments basically show that we teach the robot to drop an object into the middle pot, right? And then we use this framework to generalize so that it can drop to neighboring pots. And so we have a video of that in action. Okay, so we show demonstrations that look like this, and then we ask it to reproduce and also account for the obstacle. So lift the box, push box, speed it up, and push up box, drawing an S, all right. And so there goes our robot, draws an S, obstacle, avoids the obstacle, tries to complete the S. And placing the objects in different boxes. So we've already taught the robot to drop in the middle box. It's good. And now we should try and make it generalized to neighboring pots. It's able to generalize the motion. Cool. Right. Okay, so the last topic or specific thing that I want to talk about is a method called geometric fabric command sequences. So this was done when I was interning at NVIDIA Research. So geometric fabrics is a reactive motion generation method. So this is basically motion planning. You're given some start states, you have some goal states, you have an environment. How do we, generate feasible motion from one state to another? So the whole trajectory. So within NVIDIA, there is a framework called geometric fabrics that is very reactive, and it runs really quickly at 200 hertz on a robot. And it's actually also used in their simulators. So it's very good in that it efficiently produces smooth and humanly intuitive motion, but because it's a reactive method, it falls into local minima. So if you have, let's say, cubbies are kind of really bad for a reactive motion planner, and that is because essentially motion planning is kind of a optimization or a search problem, and reactive methods are particularly prone to non-convexities in the environment. There are other methods, sampling-based methods, that can kind of escape this, but they are slow, and they also produce really nasty-looking and unintuitive trajectories. So we introduced this geometric fabric command sequence method, which produces motion for manipulators, and this provides reactive motion, right? So it can quickly respond to local changes in the environment, while also being able to escape from local minima and get global solutions. Basically, how it's done is we sequence up these geometric fabrics and run global optimization over them. And the decision variables of these are intermediate states. Now, one of the issues with global optimization techniques, and in particular in this case, it's very hard to get gradients with respect to kind of the motion planning problem. So you need to use a black box optimizer, basically. They are probably the worst type of optimization problem to deal with. And so we also want to speed this up, right? So one way of doing this is through learning. So what we hypothesize is that we can actually transfer solutions between problem setups that are very similar over different environments. And so we have a predictive model that actually predicts candidate solutions to warm start this optimization. Even more interestingly, we actually have a self-supervised loop. If you think about it, the optimization problem generates solutions. These solutions are then used as data points to train up the learning-based model. So you basically have this loop, and you can just let it run, and it will optimize and then train up your generative model to get candidates. And then this generative model gets better and better as it sees more and more data. So here are some of the tougher environments to solve. I guess we're out of time. But basically, this is just saying that we can be reactive, our trajectories are good, and also we can avoid local minima. So here are some more videos. We have real-world experiments as well as simulated benchmark. So excuse the low res, but IEEE venues have some reason allow for only very small video files. So it's kind of low res. But what is happening here is this problem is actually has a convexity, non-convexity here, right? So if you think about a local method, it should try and get as quick as possible to our goal in green here. our method is able to kind of inform the robot that you need to actually like pull your hand back or pull the arm back around the table. So it solves this is, and now we are in a setting where we also add additional obstacles. So suddenly it sees new obstacles, it's able to reactively avoid that and also do what it's meant to do. Another bunch of problems going into a box, and then reactively avoiding obstacles. Shelf problem, so it solves this. It's not an issue now with the obstacle. So it goes, reaches towards it, sees obstacles, avoids them, and reaches to the goal. Now, this is in our lab with robots. These half-closed boxes are also quite bad for the robots. So if you have a purely reactive method, it might just get stuck here and unable to reach the goal inside this box. Now, with our method, we are able to solve and reach in, find the correct way into the box and reach towards our goal. Beautiful. Okay, so let me summarize. So we contribute robot learning methods throughout the autonomy stack. So you know, if you think about the kind of types of problems that we've looked at here, they actually live in different parts of the robot, so to speak, right? Robots are fairly interdisciplinary, well, in the sense that there are people working on sensors, there are people working on state estimation, on planning, on control. These are kind of fairly separate. But what we realize is that robot learning can help all these different parts of the autonomy stack, and this includes learning for these sort of problems, right? So to represent the environment, that's more to do with the sensor or perception side, but also for anticipatory navigation and motion generation for manipulators. Yep, and that's all of the stuff I've got for today. Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, what's the robot using to perceive the environment? So cameras or motion sensors?
So we've done a variety of different things. We have played around with trackers. So in our lab over there,
So like inertial acceleration.
So these are called opti-trackers, and they're basically, you can put a marker on things and then where they are. So a lot of the stuff with manipulators and kind of reactive stuff with that, that's kind of the easy way out. People working on ground robots in our lab also use things like LiDARs. That's much messier. Questions?
So you showed a video where you were able to predict the dynamic trajectories of the humans, right? And the robot was able to navigate through the dynamic environment. But what I'm curious about is that how were you using those distribution of trajectories to actually identify like where the robot actually goes?
Good question. The magic is in this time to collision factor. Basically, in the control cost, we would make a prediction ahead and kind of estimate when it's expected to collide. And then that forms a penalty term at the control cost.
How do you train the self-supervised component of your system?
Right. Okay, so we have a global optimization problem, and we pair it up with a generative model. Right. So in the beginning, so the global optimizer we were using was just CMA-ES. And what we would do is, so for CMA-ES, you can warm start it by giving it a batch of solutions. So what we did was we basically had stages, and the first stage, there were no warm start solutions, and basically the optimization problem will try to kind of solve, right, and get solutions. And that actually forms a data set. So conditional on our environment and problem setup, we have these samples. And then we can use that to train our conditional generative model on that. And then we kind of keep on repeating. And as we solve more and more problems, we have more and more data to train our conditional generative model. And so the model learns better. And as you go through, the generative model also makes better predictions for warm start.
In the crowd simulation you showed in the earlier, like what are some applications? Like I see this application that I think we discussed about, if there's a emergency, how would you go about simulating something like there's a bomb explosion, or somebody shot a rifle in the middle of a crowd, then people are running around.
Yeah, there's a whole field in civil engineering that actually does that. I've seen these videos of them modeling the Mecca, the holy thing. People go around it, and that. So in crowd safety, they're actually very interested in this. However, the culture in that research community is much more closed source. So there are lots of actual commercial products out there to do crowd simulation, but they are not usually data driven. They have these constructed models of how they assume each particle will move, and then on the macro, it's kind of like a fluid, right? Moving through, and that's where kind of learning can help if you have crowd data to estimate parameters.
What are your comments on, like, if you may have seen some of these videos of like a really complex traffic situations in probably developing countries, Pakistan and India, you don't have any traffic lights, but you have all these auto rickshaws all going around, right? But there is some kind of order in that chaos. So can you simulate something like that? What are your comments?
This is there's so much money. So actually, this has been a timeline of my PhD. So the first topic was what I worked on first, and then I got really into this. But the comment I want to make here is that all these self-driving car companies have poured so much money into this. It's gone crazily competitive, and they're doing something really funny where they have like these massive data sets and they train out these really good models, but then they only release a little bit of the data set, and you get a taste of what things are. So I think the barriers for academics and universities to do this is probably much too high to get something that's kind of state of the art.
Okay, there are no other questions, I guess.
So that's slide with the diffiomorphic.
Yes.
So the point of that was to make it stable.
Yep.
What caused it to? That's trying to generate
Yeah.
like the source.
So the eigenvalues of the dynamical system, if you linearize there's nothing really bad about. So some systems are unstable. It's just that the systems that we want to model are stable. So in this case, stable systems actually provide a very good prior so in a lot of times you know that you want to end here, for example, and in that case the system would be stable regardless of what sort of start point you're at, right? There are systems that are unstable, like you want to shoot off as you integrate, you go far away, and that's done by the definition of the system, right? And you can look at that by looking at, if you linearize each of these. So each of
it's
these points.
nothing to do with issues with the hardware.
No, yeah.
Okay, is there any question from the other side, from Zoom, people on their Zoom? There's some questions. Cool. No questions from Zoom? Okay, then we can end the session. Thank you so much. Yeah, just end the session.